Marco, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Patrick, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm very excited to be here. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. So I'll kick it off. Well, it's the second episode of our webinar series. Michael Thomas set the bar very high with the first webinar, so I'll do my best to be at that level. And tonight we are gonna talk a little bit about aligning and optimizing businesses. Patrick gave me a very quick introduction, so I'll just go very quickly. I have almost 20 years experience in managing consulting and IT in 3 continents. Got my MBA from Berkeley in Colombia, my master from Milan Poly, and before being the managing partner at Bizal, I was the head of technology and CIO at Radian Global Advisor, managing consultant WT, and before that, business consulting director at BT. My focus is on business strategy, IT strategy, and how to align the two. So let's get into navigating the new economy. We are in a very interesting time. The economic situation is very weird, and companies are quickly adapting to what is the current status, but also the future status after pandemic of our economic tissue. They are modifying their business models. They are adopting new operative models. For instance, they are working remotely. They are adopting smart working. They are rotating teams into the office. And they are definitely leveraging technology in order to be more efficient. It's very interesting what's happening at technological level. This conversation is going to be mainly about business, but I'm going to give a few hints about technology. And during this time, people would expect a very interesting adoption pattern, which is fostering communication and collaboration for people, because people are working virtually, they're working remotely. So making them communicate better, collaborate better in person or virtually. And what would you would expect from a technology standpoint is systems to be integrated and services to be integrated to create a better user experience, to create a better customer experience. What is happening in reality is actually quite different. Technology is actually getting adopted in a very opportunistic way instead of a strategic way. Everything is very tactical. Companies are actually working around problems. They're just trying to make things work. And because they're tightening the belt and being very conservative with spending, their mantra is around efficiency and trying to cut costs wherever they can. So instead of fostering innovation and leveraging technology to integrate services and doing things better, they're just trying to do the best with what they have and digging into the existing technology, trying to untap some value that was there. But in reality, they're not really serving the business. They're just scrambling around with what they have. This is the one slide that I would like everybody to remember after this webinar. So if you have to just remember one thing, please remember this slide. It's very simple, but it's very powerful. And everything starts at the top. To be successful, a company needs to have a clear vision, a clear mission, clear corporate values. This is imperative. You cannot be successful, you cannot attract a consistent talent, you cannot grow a corporate culture if the vision, the mission, and the values are not crystal clear from the very beginning. And you want to put this out everywhere you can. It's not just something that you post on your website and stays there for beautification or just to show it to the world. It's something that you want to live and breathe. And you want to put it on everybody's wallpaper on laptops. You want to put it on posters in the office. Only when this trickles down to every single person in the company, you are going to have a cohesive team across the board. The next step down is the business strategy. And this is where things are usually getting tricky at company level, because the business strategy is usually up in the executive hemisphere, and everybody is on the same page at executive level. Then you start getting lower, you start getting a senior and middle management, and things don't filter down that well. And this is very common in many companies. So what happens is people at lower level don't really see the big picture, don't really see where the company is going in the long run. What are the business goals? And when they are making day-to-day decisions, they are not having all the information that they can have to make the best decision. This is kind of a problem that a product manager faces every day. They are getting information from all sources, and they are delivering information to other sources. For instance, they're interfacing with marketing, with the strategy department, and with sales, and then they're interfacing with engineering, with development, with biz dev, and they want to share the story to everybody. So when the developers are working on a product, they know what is the big picture, they know the story. Same here. You want everybody in the company at technology level, but at every enablement level, to know what is the big picture. I put technology here, but you can replace that with any company function, or you can replace it with processes, with organizational structure, with talent, or as I said, with sales, with marketing, with finance. Everybody needs to align to the business strategy and the business goals. And everybody needs to set their goals in alignment with the general goals. Creating KPIs to do that seems simple and it's easy on paper, but it's really difficult in life. This is the second part of the framework. Once again, it's very simple, but it's very powerful. You start with the business model. You want to make sure that you have a sound business model. And then you create a business strategy. And then you have a product strategy and a product roadmap. But what happens is when you're making adjustments, when you're changing things, maybe you are under competitive pressure and you're making adjustments, or maybe the market conditions change and you're making adjustments in your products, or maybe you're receiving customer feedback and you are changing and reshaping your products, or even pivoting. When you're changing one piece, you have to make sure that all the other parts are in alignment. You cannot just focus on one aspect and then forget about the rest. Clearly, this is pretty high level. It doesn't mean that this replaces good strategy frameworks. You're still going to use your 3 C's, 4 P's, Porter's 5 forces, but you want to have something that keeps you honest, if you will, so you never forget about checking and realigning things. And we talk about this that I would call a business layer, and then you have an enablement layer under that, and you want to align that. So it's a kind of double alignment, and we're going to see it better in the next slide. So optimization. This is really important for me, because I come from Steve Blank and Lean Launchpad, and business model canvas is the way I used to look at a business at 360 degrees, but sometimes it's the way I look at a business problem. Even if I'm trying to solve a technology problem, I always start here to better understand the business, to understand the big picture. What happens when you're optimizing your business is you're making changes in different areas of your business model. But when you're making a change in one area, you are creating a chain of effect, and you are changing other parts of the business model. So there is always a chain effect that you want to consider. There is always an effect when you're changing something. Having a structure, having a framework that helps you move forward and have an iterative approach is really important. If you don't like the business model canvas, there are different frameworks. But it's really important that you approach this in a very structured way. You cannot optimize a business and making changes unless you're looking holistically at the whole business and looking at all the elements of the business. What we are talking about tonight is aligning through the different stages of the business. Early stages when you're planning or launching a venture, that's a very exciting time. Or when you're expanding the product line, or when you're in fast growing mode, or when you have an established business, maybe a large business, and especially if it's an ex-government business. Or when you're planning to close down the business, or you're planning for an exit because you're selling your business. As I said, there is a double layer of alignment. So we are always going to look at aligning the business layer. That means the business model, the business strategy, the product strategy, and all the goals. And then the enablement layer, which is technology, processes, organizational structure, or you can look at the different functions like finance, sales, marketing, etc. So let's go with the first one. This is a great exciting time. You are planning your first venture. You are launching a venture after working on it for several months. What happens is the team is very excited, a lot of ideas all over the place. If you're coming from a business school, you probably have a very methodical approach to creating a business. You might be using the business model canvas, or you might be using something else. The most important thing, though, is to have a framework. You need to have structure, and you need to have a baseline, because when you have a baseline, you can change things. You can pivot your business, but you know that you're going from point A to point B, and maybe you're just testing point B and see if that idea works. If not, you go back to A, and then you try different things, and you move to another state. That works great. Then everything moves to a new state. And if you want to track success, if you want to measure it, you need a framework that allows you to measure the status quo and measure what you're changing. If you are changing 10 different things a little erratically, and then something good happens, well, you'll say, hey, it's success. But that's not measurable success. You don't know where success was coming from. Probably was coming from one of those 10 things, maybe a couple of those, but you will never know. If you don't have a framework, this is not going to happen. So to test efficiently, you need that. Just quickly about technology. The technology driver at this stage is speed and agility. Because you're testing so much, you're trying out new things. Your venture is shaping, nothing is carved in stone yet. You don't want to be locked into some technology that you cannot get out. You need to be agile, you need to adjust to support your business. So it's absolutely imperative for the IT team to be very quick and create solutions and implement solutions that are agile and help the business at that level. Second stage that we are looking at is another very exciting one. You got the first products, you got your core products, you're starting making money, and then it's time to come up with new products, expanding the product line. Maybe you have a product roadmap and a bunch of things that you want to work on. It's a very exciting time, but excitement doesn't mean that you don't have to be methodical. It's imperative to have a structured way to expand your product line. Because it's so easy to get excited. It's so easy to get sidetracked when you have many different ideas. And it's also a time when you're always looking at the customer, you're looking at feedback from the customer, and you're working a lot on the market side of a business model. So customer segment, value proposition, how you're serving your customer, how you're making money, how you're selling. And regarding that, you might want to check out the product management canvas that UC Berkeley developed. It's actually really nice. but you don't want to forget about the other side. You don't want to forget about the operational side. It's not very sexy, but it's absolutely important if you want to be successful. You cannot forget about your cost side. And at this stage, you still have to be extremely agile. You cannot be monolithic just because you had a few initial successful products. You still need to test. You still need to have an agile approach and a framework to grow with that. There is one big risk at this point, just because sometimes product come out of different minds, different people, different departments that are very excited for things, and the teams come up with product that look good on paper, but they're not necessarily right. A classical case is when you're early stages and trying to cannibalize your own product. Cannibalization is not a bad thing if you are an established company, you have an established product, you're facing competitive pressure, and you just want to innovate and eat your own lunch because you don't want somebody else to eat your lunch. But when you're early stages and you're just monetizing your core product, it might not necessarily be a good thing. So you want to keep an eye on that. And a big problem here is when you're trying to do too much and too soon and bringing too many products to life. We actually have a case study coming up about that. The technology driver here is clearly flexibility. Once again, you have a very agile approach. You're moving. You don't know if a product is going to necessarily work, so you need to be flexible to move up, move back, move forward. You don't want to be stuck into platform, especially old school mainframe platform that are not really suitable for this type of environment. So let's look at the first case study. I called it Too Much Too Soon. This is a stealth matchmaking / social media company. Very interesting idea, very different take on matchmaking with not just the usual virtual swap left and right approach, but something deeper, including some in-person elements. And when I started working with the founder and executive team, they had like so many ideas around what they were trying to achieve. They had at least 5 or 6 different ideas and different products. What we tried to do was to create a framework to consolidate all these ideas and actually created a consistent go-to-market strategy. We started with the master plan, with the initial framework that sets your business model. Because I'm coming from Steve Blank, the doctrine, I decided to use business model canvas, and the founder was very excited to use that. So we worked to set the stage that was the master business model. So where they want to go, what they want their company to be. And that serves as a sort of template for you. The second step that we took was to look at all these ideas. They called them product, but some were just concepts, some were ideas, none was really a product. And I wanted to use a very methodical approach to actually move from concept to idea to product. And this was to isolate every single concept or idea and treat that as an independent venture. So think about, you have a little product and you want to build a company just with that product. And you create a business model for that, the best business model that you can create for that specific product. And you do that for every single idea, every single concept that you have. The next stage is to bring everything together, integrate everything. So you use your master plan, your master business model as a reference, and then you compare and match the other products. You start clearly with your core products, and your core products are gonna match very well because that's the essence of your business. So maybe you have to make a few adjustments, but they're gonna fit very well. But you might find out that some of the other products might not be necessarily a good fit. One product, especially in the early stages, that cannibalize the core product is not really a good one. So you might want to park it there and maybe keep it for later if you need to innovate. Or you might have some products that might generate a little bit of money. You might be able to monetize it a little bit, but it puts so much stress on your operational side, on your resources, that doesn't really make any sense, especially at this stage of the business. Maybe later on when you have more internal capacity, it might make sense. So you want to park it and put it in your backlog, or put it in your parking lot. And using this approach, you can figure out what are your core products and then what are possible extension of a product. You pretty much create a product roadmap and a go-to-market strategy that is going to help you throughout the course of, let's say, the first years of your venture. Another very exciting time is when you're facing fast growth, especially when you're expanding very quickly, or maybe expanding geographically. You got an initial good model and you're trying to get to market. If your business model is based on network effects and generating network effects, so this is extremely important. Usually speed is the business driver here, because you want to be quicker, you want to beat the competition, you want to be the first to market, you want to be the first to capture so many markets. Efficiency is not as important as speed, so you might want to spend a little more money to be able to do that quickly than just trying to tighten the belt everywhere and slow down the growth. It's also a very error-prone phase, because you're pushing so hard to expand, you're pushing so hard to come up with new resources, and things happen. So you might want to pay attention to have a structured approach, but you also recognize the fact that top line at this point is really important for you, because you want to expand and you're not keeping such a close eye to the bottom line. There is a critical element here, which is some of the enablers, especially technology, especially IT. This is where you start having a crazy disconnect between the business side and the IT side if you don't really look closely to align the two. There is the risk to grow too fast too soon. Once again, you don't want to stretch too thin. And you always need to remember what are the good basic principles of corporate finance. I want to give you a very quick example here. I was discussing an opportunity with a construction company, and they wanted to move very, very fast. They wanted to double their business in 12 or 24 months. That is possible, but what they were not considering here is, in a capital expensive business, you cannot grow without funding. You need sometimes a lot of money to be able to sustain that type of growth. And that type of money might not be available. That kind of financing might not be available, especially when you're looking at the capacity of resources. And here you're talking about trucks or caterpillars that cost millions of dollars. When you run out of capacity of one, you max out the capacity. It's not always that you can find an OPEX way to increase capacity. Sometimes you just have to buy another piece of equipment, and to do that, you need capital. So it's not just looking at the total cost of ownership when you are making decisions. You always have to look at working capital, because in this phase is absolutely critical. A few tips for sustainable growth. You want to control your pace. So if you want to grow very fast, very well, but you need to be very structured, very methodical, and making sure that you are setting the pace and all the elements fall together. So not just on the exciting market side, but also on the operational and cost side. You want the ability clearly to scale efficiently, and you want to be strategic. That means you're thinking forward when you're making decisions. You're thinking that your business is going to grow fast, and in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, you're almost going to be a different animal. So when the internal departments, when the enablers are making decisions to sustain the business, they need to think forward. Because if they don't do that and they just go plain, they're going to have to play catch up, and that's not a nice spot where to be. Here, you want to make sure that the core model that you're trying to expand and to grow very fast is very sound. So you need a really good process that works well, an organizational structure that works well, so you can expand fast. If you don't have that, you are gonna be just scrambling around. And here, as I said, there is that time when you want the tight alignment between IT and the business growth. You want a roadmap that is really in lockstep. Governance, very attached to process, is critical. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to compliance, because if you're not in compliance and expand fast, it's a disaster, and you want to do risk management. I want to highlight cybersecurity at this stage, because especially if you're in a tech and you are a small company and you grow fast, if you have issues with cybersecurity when you're small, you're gonna have really big problems when you go fast. You might have to spend like 10 times the money to remediate situations. The technical driver here is scalability. You must be scalable. You must allow the business to grow and explode. You don't want to constrain it. You don't want to constrain it because of CapEx. You need a very scalable and flexible model. And this is the second case study. So think about a global financial company, not too big, but with operations in 3 continents, growing organically, a few different entities, a lot of financial research, billions of dollars under management in their strategies, setting up new businesses, new products. So very vibrant, a very high growth mode. When they engaged me as their CIO, the goal was to create the global IT strategy and look at post-acquisition integration. The very first thing that we did was not talk about technology at all. For the first week, we locked ourselves in with the executive team in the meeting room and talk only business and whiteboarding. We whiteboarded the business model, probably the biggest business model canvas I ever wrote down. It took a whole wall, and it was a conversation only about business. It was about how they would achieve their goals, business strategy. The growth plan was a sore point because it's always hard to pin down things when you're making so many assumptions, but it's critical if you want to align your IT and your enablers in general, that you have a good sense of where you want to be and how you want to grow. So we did a functional assessment of all the different entities to understand if they had like critical issues, what was going on with the different corporate function in the different entities, if there was a problem with the overall integration. And then, and only then, look at the technology layer. We did a global discovery that meant speaking with pretty much everybody in the company, looking at all the technology elements, speaking with all the vendors and outsourcers, and create pretty much a snapshot of the status quo of IT. And with that in mind, I envision the future state of IT, the future state of the IT ecosystem, how it would be in 5 or 7 years, and how they could go from the status quo to that status in lockstep with the high growth that the business had in mind. Where to make investment and investing in what technology to support the business at what stage. So once again, instead of playing catch up and putting band-aids, thinking forward where the business needs to be, and then you can accelerate or you can go in contraption mode depending on the business need, but that roadmap is gonna stay aligned with the business. A few technology tips, kind of lesson learned. If you have an aggressive growth plan, well, you have to make rapid adjustments. And that means that your IT environment needs to scale very quickly. You cannot have a big monolithic CapEx model. You need to be lean. You need an OpEx model. And a good idea is to leverage everything as a service if you can. You always have to keep an eye on the total cost of ownership. You cannot just go bananas in the cloud because your cost might just balloon. But using an as-a-service approach is extremely helpful from a budgeting standpoint. It makes your life way easier as a CIO because you can get down to a per employee cost. So you can kind of forecast the future budget just looking at how the headcount is supposed to grow. I would like to stop for a second and see if anybody has questions so far. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of the session, but I would love to give 30 seconds for people to ask a question.
And I'll just say, if during that time you also have questions while Marco is talking, feel free to pop it into the chat, and he will be able to get to it.
Great. Daniel, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Marco. Brilliant presentation. Could you expand a little bit more on the second bullet that you have on technology tips?
Sure. So this is an interesting one. I can probably speak for about that for hours, but the concept is when you're using services in pay-per-use mode, what happens is you're paying a little premium for the flexibility of not having your own infrastructure. So you're thinking, okay, instead of having my own data center and spending $10 million in building my own data center, I'm going to use AWS, I'm going to use Google or Microsoft, and have them manage all my storage needs, computational capacity needs. I'm going to do all my machine learning models over there. What happens, though, is if you don't think it through and plan and budget how much money you're going to spend with this model, you might end up with a bill that is insane. If you are a very nimble company that is growing fast, most likely you're going to think about that. But if you are a bigger company that has run its business for the past, 15 years, and most of the IT infrastructure was on-premise, what happens is that you don't know very well how much moving everything to the cloud is going to cost. So you can kind of budget it, but you're not really sure. And when companies start moving too fast and moving too many services too fast to the cloud, sometimes they rack up bills of millions of dollars per month that they are not expecting. And then they're saying, oh my God, we are going to need to bring everything back. Instead, what you want to do in that type of situation, you want to set up a hybrid cloud model with the flexibility of moving workloads back and forth, but it's not so trivial. So you also need to build up the capacity in order to do that. So it needs to be planned. That's why I'm saying it's great to use everything as a service, but you always need to look at the total cost of ownership and make sure that it matches your budget.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Well, since we are taking a moment, I would love to introduce my good friend and esteemed professional, professor, and Dr. Camille Guy. We went to business school together, so he has an MBA from Berkeley and Columbia. He launched a few companies. He is the CEO of KNA, CEO of Sensorcom Technologies, and I would love him to speak for a few minutes about his real life experience with making changes to an organization, trying to optimize a business, and how it actually works in real life, a real experience, if it's painful or if it's just a wizard and he can make everything go smooth.
Marco, thank you very much. And, not to really contradict what you have to say, which I will in the next few minutes, But I look at you more like a brother than esteemed colleague or professor or whoever. But actually, I'm enjoying what you're saying here. Just a couple of insights on what we're doing. Now, we are it's a small company. I started the company back in business school. And the idea is that we're going to monitor pollution out of vehicles, right? San Francisco-based clean tech. I'm going to hug a couple of trees here and there, all good. But we want to really find out which vehicle is polluting so that really if there's an 80-20 rule, then in 20% of the cases, we should be able to get rid of 80% of the pollution. So there's an entire evolution of how we got there. But at the end of the day, it's an IoT play, it's a clean tech play, it's a data play. So I'm literally the guy that if you open his trench coat, you could see all these, we even threw blockchain in there just for a good measure. So as you're kind of building that business, we're just starting to get traction. We're part of the Cisco partnership program, Intel partnership program. We are absolutely killing it. And then here comes COVID. And what happens at COVID? The weather clears up. You have this pretty little environment where the Taj Mahal you can see from more than 50 feet away. Mexico City tends to clear out. New Delhi is wide open. Beijing is Olympic level clean. And I'm looking around saying, okay, so I am now in, what tools do I have to fix this? Business model canvas. Yeah, that goes right out the window. We've used it. As a matter of fact, I knew actually my program manager at the National Science Foundation was actually the guy that implemented business model canvas at NSF. So I learned how to manipulate business model canvas to make it sound like it's doing what it's supposed to. So any tool that you use, do yourselves a favor, be honest with it. Do not fudge the numbers. You can, and you can make a business that's not making any money ever to make it look like it's actually the best thing since sliced bread. So be honest when you're using your tools. We're big fans of metrics. So, Marco talking about these sort of tools being a thing, they go out the window, but you have to measure. So at the end of the day, you want to be able to measure. Agility, huge. So we took literally our business in pollution monitoring. So it was a data play. We're monitoring the pollution out of a vehicle. So time series data, for those of you technologists. And what we did is we said, well, what can we do with this? And on came this concept of monitoring temperature, sort of the check engine light of a person in real time. Turns out all the machine learning algorithms, turns out all the other stuff was exactly the same. So we literally had to pivot from basically a transportation play into a healthcare play. And I'd love to tell you that everything is rosy and all this other stuff, but at the end of the day, it's not trivial. It's actually something that, certain questions that you have to ask yourself as you're doing these pivots and all these other things. Now, we're a small company, so big company perspectives are slightly different. But in this case, you have to really think about, sort of this concept of time. Right? As a small company, you don't really have infinite resources or even large finite resources. You basically have no resources. So the question is when do you continue on? When do you stop? When do you shift? When do you pivot? So, there's always this concept of, okay, well, if you're going to fail fast. Well, entrepreneurs aren't exactly smart to think that they could potentially even fail. So you have to kind of stay on it, and that's a decision that comes to each individual person. So there isn't any metric, there isn't any steadfast rule, there isn't any rule of thumb that you can turn around and say, hey, you know what, if I get to X point, I am going to stop, right? More times than not, you don't know. You know, I don't have an addictive personality in that I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a drug addict. I don't have a gambling problem. But for crying out loud, I am an entrepreneur through and through, and hands down, probably one of the more painful things to do. Now, I'm also a technologist. So Marco pointed out, you know, I have a PhD in engineering. So when I came to business school, everything was about the technology. Well, you know, guys like Marco were very kind to me and said, oh, that's kind of cool. And then there were others, you know, as a matter of fact, I saw Henry here. So Henry will tell you that, you know, he's not quite the technologist side of things. And then there were others that were, for example, in our cluster at Haas, the guy was outright CPG, right? Consumer products. And there is nothing technology about that guy other than the fact that he has the latest iPhone and has the nicest cars and so on because he can. But it's a lot more about the sort of holistic view of the business. It's a lot more, and really that's what the business model canvas is about, is making sure that you're looking at the business as a holistic entity, not as a little piece of it. You know, Marco touched on, you know, basically the spaghetti approach, right? Where you have lots of products, you throw them against the wall to figure out what sticks. Guys, it's a business model. Is it effective? Is it efficient? But if every product is thought through as part of an entire ecosystem called the company, it's not a bad way to go. Because a lot of times with these new things, you just don't know what's going to stick. So the concept of the old days of, well, we can get organic growth by operating expense growth, right? Where your material cost is 30%, your overhead is 40%, and then your SG&A is another 20%, and you have a 10% profit margin. Well, then you're growing at 10% a year because that's what your sustained growth is. Without cash infusion, you're not getting the sort of escape velocity growths that Marco alluded to. So it's a bear. I mean, it is an absolute bear to move, to think, to run a business, to pay people, right? I mean, miraculously, payroll comes every 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks, you're staring at the bank account going, okay, what are we going to do? And somehow you pull it off. And then somehow you pull it off. And then all of a sudden it starts to turn. Logjam gets released. Things happen. On a personal level, I am going to Brazil in a week to do a pilot program. Now, I'm not sure anybody in their right mind would go to basically the belly of the beast of COVID to go do a pilot. But we believe in mask technology. So we're going to wear masks, we're going to wear gloves, we're going to do what we have to, but we're going to get these pilots done. Customer calls, you go. So it's, I don't envy anybody that's sitting in this room, because if you're sitting here, there's a reason, including myself. And so, you know what? The best thing I can tell you, guys, we're in this together. Call anytime. Marco has my contact information. My stuff can be in here. Happy to answer questions. And feel free to call at any time. We're in this together. Thanks, bud.
Thank you, Camilo. Appreciate it. Well, you know, after we present the ideal scenarios and great stories, this is a touch of reality. And it's what people need to hear, that you cannot just win by a framework. You always need people. You always need grit. You always need resiliency. And you have to believe in yourself. So let's not forget.
Amen.
Let's not forget that. Great. So let's go very quickly with the other two stages. We have now the established business stage. Well, this is where the company is big. Think about a large company. Think about an ex-government company. where everything is siloed, where everything is about politics. The main problem is miscommunication. Usually people don't talk to each other. Partial information is being shared. As we said before, everything should trickle all the way down, but now people are retaining information because of corporate dynamics. They're protecting each own garden. Or maybe some teams have frictions and they're trying to influence different part of the business by not sharing the information that they have and pushing it in one direction. So what happens here is probably the most frustrated thing for both business and IT. And it's when IT tries to make the best decisions with the information they have, but they might not have the right information. If one department that is developing a new product doesn't share that information, IT is not going to be able to make long-term decisions to support that. If they don't know in what trajectory the business is going to go, they're not going to be able to create a roadmap that is in close step with that. So it's also a very difficult time because there is no perfect organizational structure. There is no perfect way to solve this problem. We studied in business school that you can have a matrix model, you can have a divisional model, you can have a geographical model. They don't necessarily work. In some companies they work, you try to replicate it in another company, it doesn't work. There is a big factor of corporate culture. So there is no perfect recipe. But the one thing that you can keep in mind as a tip here is that information sharing is really the way to go, because clear communication of that vision, of the strategy by the leadership and going all the way down helps people understand the big picture and make better day-to-day decisions. Transparent communications between teams, well, clearly it's ideal. It happens, but it's more difficult as the company becomes big and political, but still you want to strive for that. Here, the CIO is a critical figure because it's a sort of glue between the different teams. If the CIO is not a communicator and communicates with all the different teams, understands where the business is going, officially and unofficially, cannot communicate that information down to the IT team, to engineering, to DevOps. So the role of a CIO in this type of situation is almost the role of a product manager, trying to get all the pieces together and create that story that everybody understands. There is also, there is also a danger zone here, which is not really related to technology. It's about process. And sometimes it's like an efficient process, sometimes a non-existing process, sometimes the process is so convoluted that people just skip it. And think about the most amazing CRM solution that you can have. You spend millions of dollars in that. But if people don't really use it, if there isn't a process for salespeople, for pre-sales, for engineering, to all update the system at the same time, or within a window, you're not going to have meaningful information. So you spend $10 million in your shiny CRM, and then you have information that is not really consistent. It's incomplete. It's inaccurate. It's meaningless. It's absolutely pointless. You cannot solve business processes with technology. You need a process, and then you need a technology to support that. The technology driver at this stage is efficiency. You want to be efficient. You want to make sure you're using your money in the best way. And finally, it's not really a sexy stage if you're shutting down the business, but it can be an exciting phase if you are exiting and you're selling your business. The most important thing here is to set the goal. Are you going to shut down the business and milk the cow? So are you trying to squeeze every single penny out of your customer? Or maybe you want to maximize client experience and give back to the community. You're a billionaire, you're shutting down because the business is dying, you don't really care and you want to give back. It depends, it's your goal. Or sometimes you want to push for long-term growth. Sometimes you want to shoot for short-term cost efficiency because you want to sell the business. It really depends. Do you want to give the business in good shape, or do you want to just maximize the numbers on paper? Set the goal and make sure that your executive incentives are aligned with the goal. If you don't do that, you create a conflict of interest that is incredible. So that's the most important thing that you want to do when you're shutting down the business or when you're exiting. Also, cost usually is the main driver, but you also want to make sure that you understand the time frame for closure, because if you're shutting down in 6 months or in 2 years is very different. That really matters for all departments, and especially for IT, because they need to know if they have to support the business for just 6 months or if they have to support the business for 2 years. It means they might need to renew some contracts. It means that might have to make small investments, but knowing where they're going to use the money in a very frugal way. And in this type of situation, total cost of ownership, that's your criterion for decision making. Clearly, the technology driver here is minimizing cost. That's it. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for putting up with my Italian accent. I would like to open up the floor to questions.
Should we start with a couple of questions that are in the queue?
Sure. Give me a second. Let's see.
We've got 3 general questions and 1 directed at Camille.
Yeah, Patrick, why don't you read the question so we make it a little more interactive?
Happy to. I would love to directly address Dr. Camille then at this point. Looks like the first one is to him. When you're facing a macroeconomic tsunami, when measuring things is important and when things are too expensive, what things are too expensive to measure and what things must be measured regardless of cost? Right? What things are you measuring now and what sorts of things did you have to drop?
It's a great question, right? I mean, you can't measure everything, but you have to measure some things, right? So in my case, I have couple of rules of thumb. Obviously, the biggest one is the bank account balance, what you owe, what you have coming in. You know, you sort of have to have that in your head. At least, you know, I find that to be quite useful. You know, you sort of get a feel for where the business is. Another thing that we measure is we like to measure productivity. So I like to look at revenues per employee. So, you know, depending on your industry, that could be anything from 20, 30, 50K outwards of, you know, sort of 250K if you're, for example, a software company. The things that you sort of drop when you're measuring things that you kind of don't pay attention to when you're in a crisis mode is things like you sort of push concepts like, you know, we're a manufacturer, so return rates, first pass yields, right? Things like that we kind of, you know, there really isn't, how should I say, there really isn't something that's too expensive to measure. If you think you need to measure it, you probably should measure it. So a lot of, and you can imagine, right, as a PhD, I was trained to be hyper analytical. As a CEO, you really have to be sort of super gut instinct. And so it's really odd for the people that have known me pre-MBA for me to say something like, well, if you feel like you should measure it, you probably should measure it, right? Pre-MBA would be, well, you know, if you took this metric and you multiplied it by that metric and then you inverted this particular matrix and you did, and it came out to be 3 amps, therefore you should measure it. Right? So right now it's if you think you should measure it, you probably should. That's probably the best advice that I can give you. And you'll figure out very quickly that it's a waste of money and time in order for you to measure that. So in which case you'll stop very rapidly because you'll realize it's a colossal waste of time.
That generally applies, I think, across the board, not even just in these
Right.
conditions. Thank you for that. Yeah. Let's throw the ball back to Marco. Marco, we've got a question from Bart here. What's the formula for budgeting technology improvements, right? Too often we're looking at costs and software and sort of outside external implementers when there's a bigger cost that comes from disruption, training, and client loss of confidence or worse. Are there formulas that are used by the pros like yourself to more realistically estimate that total cost, and how do you evaluate that?
Well, I wish you could call it a formula and just plug in some numbers and get the answer. It's not that easy, but you definitely need to do a cost-benefit analysis. And what you do in this type of situation, you want to look at the different scenarios. You want to compare what's happening when you are making investment in the technology, and what happens if you let things go, and look at pretty much the detrimental cost in terms of you're getting disrupted by somebody else, and you are falling behind on a competitive level. So you are going to account everything, and once again, look in terms of total cost of ownership when you are implementing this solution. So in your model, you want to put all these elements in and just calculate how much is it going to cost, but also how much revenue is it going to generate for you. So in terms of cost on one side and benefits on the other one. You have to make assumptions. It's not easy. Sometimes you have to go by guts because you have some data, but you might not necessarily rely 100% on those. So it's a lot of science, but there is a little bit of art, and sometimes it comes with experience. Sometimes it comes with knowledge of the industry or knowledge of the technologies that you're trying to implement. Because if you know that something is just a hype and it's going to end, maybe it's not the right technology to invest a lot of money in. But if it's something that is really disrupting the market and you need to jump on, maybe you have to make that investment in terms of technology, in terms of training, in terms of adoption.
That's a great question. And I also encourage everyone here, if you do have questions that are not written out yet and you want to jump in, please feel free. Raise your hand or even just ask. But let's move on to the question by Michael, which is actually almost verbatim the type of question that I wanted to ask to you personally too, Marco, is how do you keep people aligned around a strategy in an organization when the strategy has to keep changing because of changes in the environment, right? We've got the pandemic, we've got constantly increased competition, and in most spaces, new opportunities, more capital dries up. What is the way to keep multiple stakeholders and multiple players aligned in an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that really comes down to one thing, that is corporate culture. And if the leadership team is great at socializing information, at sharing transparently what is going to happen, people are going to know. They are going to know what's the big picture. It's a little idealistic. It really works well in positive situations when the company is growing, when everything is going well, and you kind of have this positive flywheel, and everybody gets energized. When things are not going so well, sometimes the leadership team tries to protect you a little more from the negative outlook, and so that lack of information it can be detrimental on one side, but also prevents morale to go down to under your shoes. So you need to use your intelligence and your emotional intelligence to understand how to do things. But transparency is always a good mean. Just make sure you are communicating things with a grain of salt, and you are still inspiring your team, even if things are not going in the right direction, maybe for now, but you want to make sure that you're not killing your team morale. Hopefully that answers your question, Michael. Camille?
Can I jump in real quick? So
Absolutely.
Marco, you're 100% correct. But at the end of the day, the key is communication. Is that if you're communicating with your team and you're honest with your team, right? If the team thinks you're full of shit, you're toast. But if you're communicating and you're communicating honestly with the team, oddly, they'll stick with you, right? They'll really stick with you and they'll fight through the battles. And really, it's all about going to war, right? The scenario that you've kind of mapped out is war, right? You want to have everybody, the person in the bunker with you is the guy that you want to be there with you, right? So as long as you're communicating, it will absolutely happen, right? The strategies can move all over the map. It makes I mean, literally, we went from transportation to healthcare. The team went, literally, it was almost like it was seamless, that they were always in the healthcare business. But it's something that it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So probably one of the few things I've done right.
Thanks, guys.
That's awesome. Thank you, guys. Another question here from Carl Jacobs. Aren't incentive plans required to support the company's goals at every stage of the company, given these alignments and implementations, right? And not just at the closing of that company. And Carl, I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that, but I think that's, as I understand it, that is the question.
Yeah, that's basically the question. It's, incentives need to be all the way along, just like you talked about the communication of the strategy, involvement in the strategy, not just communicating the strategy is another way to get people on board and so that they know where the ship is going, that they're helping steer the rudder and they know what their role is in that, then they're more likely to be involved and supportive.
You are absolutely correct, Carl. So the point there is not that it's not important at the other stages, but when you're closing down and you're setting the goal, that goal might be different from the direction where the company was going before. So when before everything was clear and for years, it worked well. The incentive plans were very consistent through the history of the company. When you're shutting down, you might have to set very, very different goals and a very different set of incentives. So that's why I stress it out over there, because you might end up in a crazy situation. But you're absolutely correct, Carl. If we don't have any more questions, we can jump into some breakout rooms. Oh, Toby.
I'm not sure of the formality here. I'm just gonna blurt out my question versus typing it out. But thank you for this presentation. This was great. I learned so much and took a lot of notes. One thing from my 9 years in the military was there was a lot of contingency plans. So preparations for the what ifs and whatnot. Obviously, with this presentation and navigating the new economy and aligning and optimizing your business. And I don't know if there's really a correct answer for this, but is everyone still there?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
Sorry. I saw some shuffling going around. Is there a component in your strategy there where you are preparing for a doomsday or some really bad what ifs as it affects the business?
Wow, a doomsday.
as it in correlation to the business.
Well, I mean, when you look at plan B, you're already done with your plan A. You have to believe in what you're doing. So if you start looking at a contingency plan, it means that your heart is not all there, and thinking about the fallout strategy, well, I mean, it's probably in everybody's mind, but if you're spending more time doing that than actually working on your business, as you said, you're pretty much doomed. So you have to be very realistic through the stages of business, and looking at data. Sometimes going by gut feeling, but first, before you go from just A to B, well, you can be iterative. You can try different things. I mean, what Camille shared is there was a downwards trajectory, and they pivoted. They switched to something that was more relevant. That was definitely not a plan B for them. They didn't know. They just caught the opportunity. So more than just thinking about plan B, I would say that spirit of being agile and really being able to change and being open to change is the most important thing.
Okay, thank you.
Camille, you want to
Toby, yeah, let me just add to this. In general, when you have these kind of sort of exogenous things happening to you, the military comes from, so we do a fair amount of work for DOD and things like, so we know enough about how they think and what have you. Their goals are very different than business goals, in that their goal is to bring everybody back. In business, it's not about sort of protecting the group and bringing it back. We tend to have more of a let's burn the ship strategy, right? We've landed, burn the ships. We're not going anywhere other than forward. And so it gets interesting, right? Because, you know, people have to depend on the fact that you're going to take care of them, knowing that they can't go back.
Right.
So it's a tightrope. It's really a tightrope, but more times than not, it's a burn the ship strategy. You know, we'll figure it out on the way, but we're going forward.
Right, that makes sense.
Hey, Marco. I'd like to offer a couple of comments if I could. I'm going to go back to the first question. And you said that measurement is very important. And I agree with that wholeheartedly, because measurement is what helps you keep doing what's working well and what helps you change and looking for ways to get better. A couple things that I don't think were mentioned that are critically important. I think you have to measure customer satisfaction and quality as the customer perceives it. Because without those two things, nothing happens until you get a customer, and nothing great happens until you get a lot of customers. And those are things to measure. The other thing is a key driver of business success is employee engagement and employee performance, particularly key employees. And key employees change over time. Might be engineering, might be sales, finance, IT, product development, whatever. At various stages, when you need those key employees, if you're not thinking about it early and getting them in place, then things that are critical to success are not going to happen. And you have to make sure that you've got those employees engaged and really enjoying it and really making an impact. And it's got to trickle down. So when this is all said and done, for each of your key executives, whether they're functional or leading businesses, they're going to have a plan. They're going to have key metrics. You measure the performance versus that. And if you've done everything right, as you indicated, then you'll see success, or you will have advance notice to pivot, and the organization can pivot together. So just a couple of additions.
Thank you, Ernie. I appreciate that.